Thank you very much indeed. And actually, I think this was an excellent summary, so let's go for lunch. Now, but I came all the way from Amsterdam here to give my talk, so I will do it anyway. Well, thanks for inviting me here. Like I said, I'm from Amsterdam. I lived there already for almost 50 years. And I consider this region to be my second home, so I'm very privileged that I've been asked to speak today at this occasion. I spent here also time working for the University of Maastricht, working on open innovation, and I will also share some insights that we have obtained in that environment. So let me first see whether my remote control works, otherwise this is the first brilliant failure. Ah, well, maybe I can use, yeah, yes. Here it is. Okay, almost. Well, I think that when we talk about the future, and we do a lot today, not only the future of this region, but the future in general, we are very dependent on entrepreneurs. And actually, mind you, entrepreneurs we all are. And what is my definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who is looking for something that can add value. He's looking for chances, and he's not only finding them, but he's also making use of them. So he's making use, exploitation of unexploited opportunities. That's what an entrepreneur does. And if you look more closely, and we did, what kind of elements are found in the attitude of an entrepreneur, you find the words like you see behind me and I see in front of me. And the word passion has already been mentioned. And you must know I spent a lot of time working for a bank, a well-known bank starting with an A, and then you can understand that risk-taking is not a trivial thing. Especially not nowadays, where people do talk a lot about risk. But there are other things that I think are equally important. Creativity, Walter already has spent a lot of words on creativity. I will do a few words on that, but that's very important. Rule breaking, very interesting, of course, when you look at society where rule breaking is not always that well appreciated. You have to learn and you have to be pragmatic. Now, I will try to come back to some of those words in the rest of my presentation. Now, a few words about creativity, because I do believe that if you're looking for ways to create value, if you are an entrepreneur, you have to be creative. And sometimes people ask me, can you measure creativity? And the answer is yes, and I would like to share with you how you do that. Well, if you remember what creativity really is, it's in fact the ability to create new patterns. Patterns that emerge in your head and in your brain. And one way to increase the number of patterns that fit in your brain, or the ability to match patterns with what you see or what you feel, is, that's a very good measure. The number of patterns is a very good measure for your creativity. So how can you increase the number of patterns that fit in your brain? Well, first of all, is to let your brain grow. How do you do that? That is by asking questions. And not simple questions like, when is this guy finished because it's almost lunchtime, but it's more like, what would happen if? And suppose that, and why is it that? That type of questions we refer to as big questions. So the number of big questions you ask is very important, because that allows you to absorb new patterns. The other thing that we are very familiar with when we talk about creativity is lateral thinking, new combinations. Because if you learn something in a certain context and you are able to translate it and use it in another context, to combine the context with the new insights, you can be creative in the new context. The question is, how do you measure that? Now, a very good measure for making new combinations is humor. As people start to laugh at the clue, new combinations are being made. And that means that people think it's funny, it's illogical, it's unexpected. But I think the number of times you laugh at the day is a very good measure for your ability and your openness for making new combinations. Now, if you take those two, the number of times you laugh at a day, and you multiply that with the number of times you ask a question during a day, you get something that is being referred to as the creativity index. And people are really seriously measuring this thing, for instance here, as a function of age. And mind you, this is an average. It doesn't apply to you. This is an average number. And it turns out that this number goes dramatically down, starting for young children. And we know young children ask a lot of questions and laugh quite a lot during the day. And when you grow up and when you become older, this thing goes down and ends with the number of 0.02, if it's 1 for 4 years old children, and that's what we call the state of terminal seriousness. Then we become terminal serious. And actually my mission in a lot of work that I do is, how do you avoid that? How do you create an environment where people do not become terminal seriousness? Which means that people still ask questions, still want to make new combinations, are open for new things. That's what my work is all about. We know that we live in a complex world. And here this picture is rather complex, but at the end of the day, what does it mean? It means that we do not always know how things are being related to each other. We don't always know what is cause and what is consequence. These things are sometimes not so trivially connected that we can understand how it is connected. And like the two men in the lower part of this picture do not exactly know what's happening above them. So if something changes there, they might receive their balls a little bit later. Somebody said yesterday to me, but I don't understand this process. In goes balls and out come also balls. So what do? But anyway. So, but if you look at it, what is the real point? The real point is that if we try something, if entrepreneurs always try, looking for something new, look for new opportunities, we might encounter disappointments. We might encounter situations that we did not expect. Sometimes that we didn't hope for, sometimes they surprise us in a pleasant way. But always there is something in common there, it is that we do not always know, or we tend to overlook side effects. Sometimes we do not exactly know what the long-term consequences will be of something that we decide now. And of course the world around us can change. I will give you an example in a minute. And also because the world is so complex, we do not really understand if we do this here, we turn this button here, what will that mean for something else in the system? Now, on the other hand, if we want to deal with the fast-changing world, we have to learn, and we have to learn fast. So that's another point of concern. If you're trying to do something, if we are entrepreneurial, so we try a new venture or we try to new activity. And by the way, this is not only about commercial entrepreneurship, it's also about social and personal entrepreneurship. It's about people who have a passion and want to see something happening, want to change something. Now, learning is very important because while doing, it was already said in the introduction, while doing you can learn. You should learn. You can learn. Now, this is something that I would like to spend a little bit more time on. Now, as an example, we did a study on people who go bankrupt. Now, we all know that if you go bankrupt, at least in the Netherlands, it means two things. You are criminal or stupid, and probably both. This is a little bit the average attitude. And we reflect it in the way we deal with people who go bankrupt. And we try to challenge that. And so we looked at people who have been bankrupt once and later became very, very successful. And we portrayed these people, made interviews, and most of them said, well, actually, my later success was a consequence of the learnings I took from my first failure. Yeah? One person said, in particular, I learned during my bankruptcy more than during my MBA period. And that's true. And very funny is then that if you look at these people, it turns out that people who have been bankrupt once and try to start a new venture again, on average, are more successful than starters. But in Holland, we have a lot of facilities for people who start a business, from a tax and from a bank point of view. But people who try it for the second time are not allowed to get in. They are failures themselves. And like we proved in our research, that is not, it's not very social in the first place, but it is also not very intelligent in the second place, because these people on average have stamina, they have passion, and they have learned. So I think they deserve much more chance to start over again, to get the second chance. Now, we try to generalize that and we say, okay, we talk now about bankruptcy, which is a kind of commercial point of way of failure, but maybe many other types of failures. So this is in general true. Entrepreneurs try to do something new, and they find themselves in a very complex world. They have to learn, and sometimes that learning doesn't take place. So maybe we can help them a little bit. So we introduced the concept of the brilliant failure. And the brilliant failure is something that has been started with a very good intention indeed. So people really wanted to do something that added value to themselves, to society, to whatever. And they were not stupid. So all the knowledge that was more or less easily available, they absorbed. I mean, I recently met somebody and he said, I don't want two types of person in my organization, people who don't make mistakes because they probably don't do anything, and I don't want people who make the same mistake twice. So you have to make use of the knowledge that's available, otherwise it cannot be a brilliant failure. And of course it has to be a failure, which means that the outcome is something different than you anticipated, that you were out for. And the fourth thing is that there should be kind of learning moment in it, that you can, so that it's a kind of progress anyway. And the brilliant aspect, of course, is that it is inspiring, that other people start talking about it or follow your example and probably can avoid the pitfalls that you have experienced. So these are the criteria for your brilliant failure. For that we have set up a Web 2.0 type of environment called the Institute for Brilliant Failures, where we invite people to come up with their brilliant failures, to share that in different areas, so not only business, but also in art, in sport, in science, in food, in technology, whatever. And we are building up a very impressive set of brilliant failures. And again, I would very much like to take the opportunity to invite you to also submit your brilliant failures, so that you can, more or less come to the conclusion that you did a very great job indeed, and on the other hand, other people can also learn from it. Now, let's share some examples of a brilliant failure. Now, this one is an interesting one, Buckler. You might remember this. Buckler was an alcohol-free beer from Heineken, and one of the reasons that it was taken from the market was that in, I think it was 1989, on the 31st of December, for those of you who are not Dutch, then we have typically an artist on television who makes jokes. And this time it was Joep van het Hek, and Joep van het Hek had very nasty words for people who were drinking Buckler beer, so it was taken off the market because people didn't dare to drink it anymore. Now, you can of course say, why was that not in the business plan of Buckler? Yeah, this is something that can happen. It's the world around you which is complex, and Joep van het Hek is part of the complex world. It was not the only reason that Buckler had problems, because there was a cheaper alcohol-free beer, Bavaria. At the end of the day, everyone concluded it tasted better. Here's another example of a brilliant failure. Some of you may know the product. It's called Viagra. And the story behind Viagra is an interesting one, because the intention of the producers, of Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company, was to produce a drug against heart failures like angina pectoris and high blood pressure. Well, when they did the clinical trials, it turned out to have a side effect with half of the population, which was appreciated by the other half, and then suddenly you have a new product. Now, how can that happen? That can only happen because pharmaceutical industries have more or less absorbed the idea of risk. They know that when they start developing a drug, the thing might not work. They accepted that there might be a side effect that is unwanted. They put that in the model, and the model is such that if there is a successful drug, it will pay also for the failures. But they know that when they start, they are not sure that the product will be a success. So risk is more or less incorporated in the model of pharmaceutical development. And that's why we are now enjoying so many new drugs, because that is part of the model. Celeband, may be interesting also for Walter. You know, of course, the concept. Celeband was a website where starting artists could expose themselves, could publish their especially music. And when people enjoyed it, they could set in little amounts of money, and for that money, when it was enough, they could produce a CD. And when the CD was produced, the people who put in the money got a CD and also a little part of the revenues. Now, at the end of the day, this was a very well-known, very, very interesting form of what we call nowadays crowdfunding. The thing went bankrupt because of the fact that the world changed. And one of the big changes, of course, was that there are not so many CDs produced anymore, because a lot of music is just published online, and you don't need all those investments anymore. Now, very interesting is that the guy who set this up is now running another business where he does more or less the same in Africa, where it is a very big success. So he took the learnings from this experience and transported it to another setting, and there he's very successful. Very interesting area that we are now talking about is brilliant failures in, let's say, in good cases, like the development aid scene. Now, you know that if you make a mistake when you are in the charity and you lose money, everyone who donated money will say, hey, that's my money that you're wasting there. So what is the consequence? People are very, very reluctant in admitting that something went wrong, because the whole public will criticize them, and they will get less money from the donators, because the people will say, oh, wait a minute, I can also give my money over there, or I keep the money in my own pocket. Yeah? So it is a tendency to be not very open about things that go wrong, and that is a pity, because at one hand we should appreciate that these people do work in very, very complex, chaotic, difficult circumstances. And think about tsunami a couple of years ago. We are sitting here in a very comfortable chairs and we talk about people who are really in the middle of the chaos, and we tell them that they should not waste any of our money. And I think that is discouraging, because then people will say, okay, if that's the attitude, we will not enter anymore in projects that are facing some risk, because before we know, well, we will be criticized. The other bad consequence of this is that people will not share their learnings anymore, because if you're open about about your failure, then you can also learn, and the people you're talking to can also learn. So the learning mechanisms are being disturbed by the fact that people don't dare to talk about their mistakes. And this is especially true in this sector, like also in the public sector, by the way, like almost everywhere, but here in particular. So what we have done, we have set up a competition, and next week we will hand out the first Brilliant Failure Award for the development aid environment. And a lot of very good cases has been sent in, and I'm very happy that people have really overcome their own let's say, hesitation, reluctance to come out and tell about things that went wrong. Just to give you one example, and I don't tell that that is the winner, but as an example, what I like very much is a project that took place in, I think it was in Uganda, where they wanted to create more awareness for AIDS, HIV, and the causes of that. So what they did was they set up a quiz, and the questions of the quiz were distributed via SMS services, and people could then send in their answers via SMS, and by doing so, a lot of knowledge was being spread, a lot of awareness was created for the causes and the consequences of HIV. The problem was that everything was done well. They invited experts on HIV and AIDS, but also on teaching and quizzes and technology and so on. So everything was there. And then they started broadcasting. And the last day before they started, they got the number that people had to use to send in their answers. And that number was 666. And it turns out, and I must admit I didn't know either, that means very bad luck. It's the number of the devil, and that 3 times. So, and the people who they were sending this to are on average a little bit more superstitious than we are. Yeah? And so nobody was sending any answer because they say, well, I'm not going to SMS to the devil. So they had to change later on the number, and then things became better, but it was a very interesting learning experience. This is an example you also might remember, the 10,000 meters Sven Kramer. Why do I call this a brilliant failure? Now, you know what happened. Kramer was skating and 10,000 meters, and Kemkes gave him the wrong advice. Now, a couple of things that I could mention about this case. First of all, at the end of the day, it was not that bad for both players, Kemkes and Sven Kramer. The second one, Sven Kramer, became very famous. Also abroad. I recently gave presentations abroad, and they knew about this case. And I can tell you, he would not have been so world famous if he would have won the race, because abroad, in contrast to what we think, people don't think that 10,000 meters is that interesting. They think it's as interesting as watching grass growing. But this was really spectacular. So now he became very famous. The way he handled the situation was also very positive. So in Holland, he became much more appreciated as a sportsman, just because the way he reacted to this. So for his further career, I think this is an excellent thing. If you look at Kemkes, I just checked, and he was invited by Ascent, the energy company, to give master classes on how to deal with disappointments. So somehow something good came out for him as well. And of course, what is the learning? We also have to learn. Well, I think the most important lesson to learn from all of us is something actually we already knew, is that men are not multitasking. Because at the end of what happened, Kemkes was writing on papers the difference between the time of Kramer and his Korean competitor, Mr. Lee, was a couple of seconds. And while he was writing, he was looking, and he found Kramer at a different place than he expected. So he was confused, and he gave this wrong advice to Kramer. But he should have thought, I'm a man, I'm not multitasking, I was doing something else. Now, we now know, and we will never do this again. So that was a very good learning. So at the end of the day, I think it's very important, if you want to be entrepreneurial, if you really want to add value in this complex world, we have to accept that sometimes knowledge comes with trial and error. And we have to accept that, and instead of hiding us for it, we have to embrace it. We have to be happy for it. We have to say thank you very much. We also have to say thank you to those who are willing to share their experience with us. So I think that this is more or less a good story about breakthroughs and paradigm shifts. And we all know that by definition they cannot be predicted. A lot of people want the future to be a kind of extrapolation of the past. And that's simply not true. That's where we see that breakthroughs and paradigm shifts really change the world, and hopefully for the better. I think another conclusion is that we have to draw from the story is that we really have to celebrate those who try. Whether they fail or succeed doesn't matter. Just the fact that they try is already something that we really should appreciate. And what we always have learned now from this is that sometimes you cannot control the world. And good things also come sometimes unexpectedly. And we call that serendipity. We know serendipity is the ability to find something important by coincidence. I always say this is looking for a needle in a haystack and then finding the beautiful daughter of the farmer. That is serendipity. So, the last thing I would like to say, and that already has been said in the introduction, failure is an option. Let's accept that. Thank you very much.